We're back, and this is one of those episodes that I think is quite fun because I've been challenged. Several people have admitted or said to me, Josh, you know, you always post these episodes or these videos about tests that you've been taking, and you promise that you're gonna follow up, and you never really ever follow up. And that's true until today. Welcome to Simply Walk the Talk. Our bodies and minds adapt to what we do most of the time. If you want to change your body and mind, you must change what it is you do most of the time. This podcast explores all things health, wellness, fitness, lifestyle, and biohacking. Stay tuned as we explore various thoughts, methods, and experiences from a multitude of conversations between our interesting guests and experts through many fields of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Simply walk the talk. Simply walk the talk.
Today I have Miss Linta Mustafa from Vytract. If you've been keeping track with my podcast and a lot of content that I put out, you may have noticed that we did a podcast together, and I promised that I would follow up with my results and the research that we get, the data we get from my gut health test. And we kind of overlooked it a little bit yesterday. We're kind of letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, but we're gonna go over that now because this is very interesting. You chose the word interesting, yeah?
Very interesting.
All right, so we're gonna talk about that. So thank you for taking your time to do this. I think this is quite important. For those of you that are watching this, we have pulled up my test results on the screen, but we're also going to edit in the results from the computer so you know exactly what it looks like. But off the bat, Linta, why don't you just kind of tell us what we did, like kind of this process for those who may not have watched the other, the podcast episode. Hopefully they will watch it soon. But let's talk about how we got to this point briefly, and then let's talk about what we see here.
Yep. So as you know, Josh, gut health is absolutely central to all facets of your health. And so when we pulled up your test results really quickly yesterday, I thought this was one of the most interesting results I have ever seen. And that's a lot, saying I've seen thousands of test results. So I'm really excited to dig deeper with you here, and we're gonna talk about some of the biomarkers that stand out. The first thing I like to do when I'm looking at a test result is let's talk about where you were in terms of your health state when you took this test. So this was a couple of months ago. You said you were coming off of some travel.
Yeah, I had been traveling quite a bit across many different time zones, which means one, my circadian rhythm, as we know, is going to be thrown off a bit. Despite all of the things that I typically do to kind of mitigate that, it's still an effect physiologically on the body and the mind and the brain. But then also not only the time change, but also the food as well, and the levels of stress. And it's like going and seeing my kids in Budapest, getting luggage lost, staying in a crappy Airbnb, not sure what the mold. I'm giving you a lot of excuses of what I deal with on probably a yearly basis, right? But that certainly was happening during this. There was nothing else that quite stood out beyond that. But
no new symptoms or anything like that?
Not that I can recall.
So just regular travel stress, you're eating new foods, you're on the road, you're not necessarily in your routine and rhythm as you are when you're at home.
Right.
Cool, okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is, we'll start with the first page of the test results. I have never quite seen this combination before, and I think it's so interesting to talk about that first. So your gut health score is around 82%, right? Which on average, I'll see anywhere between 70 to 80% for a person who is healthy, not displaying any symptoms. So this is actually a very strong overall result. But then when you look at the diversity score, I've also never seen that number before. And so I'm really excited to double click and see what is happening here, what could be leading to that score. we know the more diverse a microbiome is, the healthier a microbiome is. So usually when you see a lower diversity score, you see a lower overall gut health score. So it's kind of interesting to see the combination of both. So we're going to try to piece together what could be happening here.
And this is really cool. If you're a nerd, a mega nerd like me, and like you, I would say, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't want to put adjectives in your mouth, but I consider myself to geek out on stuff like this. So when we met up yesterday with Akanksha, right? We were all kind of giddy and geeking out about this.
Because we've never seen this before.
Right, and I haven't seen this before either. Yeah. So when I hear you haven't heard anything like this and how unique the situation is, I thought, okay, why don't we get together and let's record so that everyone can be like a fly on the wall when it comes to listening to the type of information you can get back from a simple gut health test. And you've got people like Linta and her team at Vytract that can help you go through all this. And then as I learn more about this by doing this with you, then I can also help to support. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is just bring this community together around the gut microbiome.
Absolutely. I think what you're doing is really cool, and I'm so excited to go through your results. Let's walk through how we're going to look at this on a very simple level, right? We're going to look at the good bugs, the probiotic bacteria, then we're going to look at the commensals, and then we're going to look at the bad bugs. So the first thing I see here is the very first biomarker we're looking at here is Akkermansia. What does Akkermansia do? One of the main things Akkermansia does is it activates GLP-1 in the body. This is your body's natural Ozempic. It activates that GLP-1, it takes glucose out of the bloodstream, fixes it into cells. So when you're working with clients, for example, and you're looking at either losing weight or you're working with pre-diabetic clients, those types of things, you're always looking at Akkermansia. The ideal range for Akkermansia in the gut is 1 to 5%. You're sitting at 0%. Now, this is very interesting, right? Because you could do all the things you want to do with your diet, but if you don't take a test and you don't know that you're 0% Akkermansia, no diet intervention is going to fix that. You literally have to, it's completely gone. You literally have to reseed it in the gut through a probiotic, feed it with either prebiotics or the right foods to sort of help it colonize and come back in the microbiome. Because right now it's completely depleted.
And this is important.
Yeah.
This is important. I think it's worth putting like extra emphasis on this piece here specifically, because we did talk about this on the show.
We did.
Right? We talked about the fact that like I had tried Akkermansia before, and we also had talked about like I didn't know that even though Akkermansia is a very important bug, bacteria, right?
Yep.
It's a very important bacteria. Not everyone should have it, and you were the one that pointed that out to me, right?
Not everyone should supplement with it.
Yeah, you shouldn't supplement with it because you have too high of a level of Akkermansia.
I have like 20%.
Right? And I'm on the other end of the spectrum. Yes. So we have a great sort of N of 1, N of 2 study around the differences between the guts that are out there, right? And so now I think I'm okay to kind of finally go back and say, I definitely need some of that because it would help my efforts, right?
Yeah. And that's the cool thing about the testing approach is we are all so different. We all need very different things, and you don't know what you need until you get tested, right? So that's the first biomarker that stands out to me. You're at 0%, so you definitely need to take an Akkermansia probiotic with a prebiotic to feed that Akkermansia. Then when we look at Bifidobacterium, you're very low on Bifidobacterium, you're low on Blautia, you're low on Roseborrhea, you're low on Lactobacillus, you're low on almost all of the probiotics. But then when you look at Faecalibacterium, this is a number I have never seen before. You're about 70% of your gut is made up of the same type of bacteria.
Interesting.
Which is crazy, right? In your case, though, this is driving up your gut health score because Faecalibacterium is your biggest butyrate producer. And, butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid that we absolutely need. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But now, knowing what we know now, it makes sense why we were seeing that high gut score but very low diversity score. To explain this further, I want to talk about the gut microbiome as, think about it as your gut only has a finite amount of space. So it's like, think about it as you're going to a party, you're bringing 10 people, you can only bring 10 people. And if you have, say you go to the party and you bring 8 of your friends, there's only enough room for 2 more people, right?
2 more.
And so if we bring that back to the microbiome concept, because you have so much Faecalibacterium, there's just so much less room left over for the other bacteria to exist. And so that's why your gut diversity is so low. So too much of a good bug can eventually have negative consequences.
Right. And I guess even if I did introduce, if I had introduced Akkermansia, it sounds like maybe there wouldn't have been much for it to kind of live or exist because of so much of the how do you say it?
Faecalibacterium.
Faecalibacterium.
We talk to practitioners all day that are like, oh, you say the names of these bacteria as if they were your children. So we kind of know them like the back of our hands.
Well, they kind of are, right?
Yeah, they kind of are. But this is really interesting to me to sort of help start to figure out and piece together what's happening here. For the sake of time, I'm gonna quickly highlight the role of some of these other probiotic bugs, and we're gonna move on to the rest of the gut test results.
Still recording.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Bifidobacterium, another short-chain fatty acid producer, it promotes a healthy gut barrier. Blautia, it really helps with carb fermentation. It produces butyrate, but also acetate, another short-chain fatty acid. Lactobacillus is another interesting bacteria that you're low in. I want to highlight Rosaboria, is also a large butyrate producer. Now, a lot of this, as you see, is coming back to butyrate. Before we move on, I want to highlight, most people out there don't know what butyrate is, so let's talk about it.
Butyrate. Okay.
So our Chief Science Officer of Vytract, Dr. Chidozie Ojibor, he's read almost every single paper that exists out there on the gut microbiome, and there's hundreds and thousands of these papers, right? And when I'm having discussions with him, he often says to me that if I were to talk about the #1 biomarker of health, it would be butyrate. And good for you because you're producing lots of butyrate.
Good.
But what does butyrate do? It's essentially the #1 energy source for your colon cells. So when you think about those colon cells that are doing all these types of different functions, they are working on the tight junctions between the gut barrier, maintaining a healthy gut lining, all of these, good gut homeostasis, like all of these really key functions that need to get done in your gut. Butyrate is the energy source to make those things happen.
Awesome. I mean, I'm really awesome. I think that is something that I learned quite a while ago. I heard Dave Asprey talking about that with butter and butyrate and kind of one of the ways to help heal a leaky gut was butyrate production and so on and so forth. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I remember hearing. And so when you speak about it in the way about like the junctions of the lining, it makes sense to me.
Yep, absolutely. Now let's move on to the other sections of the microbiome test. You have your commensals. Everything looks, we've made this easy to read. So if things are optimal, it says optimal, you're good to go. You can kind of move on. Everything in your commensals look good. Oxalobacter is a little low. This is an oxalate degrader. So just interesting to note.
Which, by the way, for those who don't know, that's usually what you get from like the leafy greens if you don't cook them or
exactly.
add some sort of acid or citrus element to it. But I don't do a lot of that, and if I do cook it. So I think that one's okay, right? That it's a lettuce low.
And then the last section is pathobionts. Now these are potentially pathogenic bugs. It's totally normal for the microbiome to have them in low amounts. It becomes a problem when they overgrow. Another interesting thing about you is your pathogen score is 100%, meaning there's no overgrown bad bacteria. So that's great.
Cool.
Everything here looks optimal. The last thing that really stood out to me about your test results was the exogenous pathogen section. For most people, it always comes back as not detected. These are bugs that if they are detected, it means you likely have an infection. And for you, it looks like something was detected. Now, you had been traveling, you had been on planes, you had been eating different things. But you said you weren't sick at the time. You didn't have any food poisoning like symptoms. So to me, what that tells me is because you're producing so much butyrate, your gut lining was very strong, meaning any of this bad bacteria didn't actually go out into the bloodstream and cause an infection.
Interesting. And that is actually an interesting thing, because we were touching on this a little bit yesterday, but then now that I'm revisiting this, I noticed that percentage is so low.
Yeah.
But to your point, of even a low percentage, if it's in a situation in which there's not tight junctions that are closed off, or the gut lining is
leaky,
compromised in some way, then that small percentage would get through.
Absolutely.
That's what is that 1/100%?
Yep, exactly. And if it gets through sort of into the bloodstream, it can trigger inflammation. It can trigger an immune response. So most of the time, if you have tight junctions, you have a strong gut barrier, your immune cells can, or your healthy bacteria, one of the things they do is they go find exogenous pathogens like this and they destroy them. And so it looks like your body took care of it and you never got sick.
Cool. I like that.
All right. Now let's look at what, this is interesting. This is exactly what we would have predicted is your butyrate scores at 100. Another thing we've never seen. But this is very good. Now, acetate and propionate, your other short chain fatty acids, are pretty low, which makes sense. And then we're going to see across the board, a lot of these things are looking like they're on the very close to optimal or a little bit lower, because we have a little bit less gut diversity than we would like to see. So it all makes sense. The last section of the test results, and the most interesting, is your bacteria modifiers, which is, now that we know everything that was out of range, how can we push it into the right ranges? And this is, I think, where the innovation is in sort of our gut microbiome test.
So this is the secret sauce, in other words.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, the test has identified that for you, we want to increase Akkermansia, increase Bifidobacterium, Blautia, and Roseburia. These are all the good bugs that were low, and we're trying to increase them. So it's going to show you food recommendations that we know on the back end. We built this whole AI-enabled data infrastructure with thousands of data points that help us understand these bugs, what do they like to eat? Because if you feed them what they like to eat, you're going to have more of that gut population grow. That's kind of how you can modify gut composition. So for you, we want to introduce beet, goji berries, grape fiber, and purple potatoes, because all those things feed Akkermansia. And then we have fermented buckwheat, pomegranate, quinoa, and navy beans and soy. All of those things increase the other bugs that we're trying to increase.
Copy that. Okay. I can do that.
Perfect. And the last thing here is we also give you supplements and probiotics, lifestyle changes, things to add, but also things to avoid.
Right.
What I want to leave everyone with is the microbiome is always changing. Now, it doesn't quite change on the day-to-day, right? I mean, there's kind of two different ways in which the microbiome modifies. You have smaller changes that happen on a day-to-day basis, but big compositional changes don't happen overnight. They take about 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 months for some people to meaningfully change gut composition. And so once you get your test results back, you kind of want to take action on these things right away, because if you forget about it, you go back 3 to 4 months later, these recommendations are now irrelevant because your gut composition could be totally different.
Absolutely. Well said. And I think that's super important because you did identify some of the modifiers on things that I can include. One of the things that stood out to me yesterday was things to avoid. Because I think for me, it's easy to see that.
Yeah.
It's easier to think of things to avoid rather than adding in all the things, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting, the way that our brains work, or at least the way mine works. And with most of the things on there, I mean, I think it's quite easy to avoid for those that are, hopefully you were watching, but you don't see it up there as clear, but we'll edit it in. But it says to avoid pork, broccoli, red wine, high salt, and high fat. And as you just pointed out, that's for now. That's, for this period of time.
It's not that you can't have this forever. Yeah. Just for the next couple of months as you're trying to get things into the right ranges.
I would like you to show one more thing before we wrap this up.
Yeah.
The part that showed, so it wasn't the food modifiers, but it was the lifestyle, I think, modifiers. Is that right?
Yeah.
Because, yes, this one.
Yeah.
So the one to show, it says for me to avoid hypocaloric, what was it underneath there?
Hyperproteic diet.
Yeah, so not too many calories and not too much protein apparently for now. Low FODMAP diet, obstructive sleep apnea, hyponemia syndrome, and then cold exposure. The cold exposure one was shocking to me because I'm like, well, wait a minute, I just invested in a nice cold plunge in my apartment. And, but to your point, don't have to do this all the time. And this is just something that there's a number 4 that's off to the side of it, which I love this test and the way it correlates to what is being shifted. And that's specific for the Roseburia.
Exactly, right? Because I think it's interesting you pointed that out because a lot of people will look at recommendations and they'll go, but why? And we wanted to solve that mystery for people.
Smart.
So
very smart.
Cold exposure reduces Roseburia. Your Roseburia is already very low, right? So I would avoid that for a little bit as you're trying to get that up. And then say you're like, I don't believe you. The research links are right on the side. And we make it, we have even additional resources if you're like, oh, I want to read all the papers. They're there. You can go read them.
All the research is there. Now, this is super fascinating. I genuinely hope that those of you who have been curious about what's happening with your body, like the changes that are happening, there's some things that can be sort of excused by age and by where we live and amount of money we make. However, we're just guessing unless we do something like this, right?
Absolutely.
We're just kind of throwing crap on the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, and I mean...
Unintended. You like this?
I do like that. A lot of people will, if they go see a dietitian or a nutritionist and they get recommendations back without a test, I'm always like, no. Go advocate for yourself. Go ask your practitioner to run a test and see what you really need.
Yeah. So I would highly encourage anyone listening or watching to take it upon yourself to invest in your health, truly, to understand what's happening in your gut, because it's known as our second brain, and in some cases, probably our main brain, right? Our gut tells us a lot. And then from this, you should be able to make certain dietary changes and lifestyle changes, which is also pretty cool about this. And so that we can stop pointing the finger at everyone else and everything else, take ownership for ourselves to say, okay, now I'm going to invest in making myself healthy. And this is where we start, from the ground up. So from the gut up, right? Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
No, I think just, post-COVID world, people are realizing that health is wealth. If you feel great, there's nothing better than that. So we're in an interesting era of the health revolution where people are like, maybe I need a practitioner or I don't, but the consumer is more educated than ever. And I think this is the perfect time for a product like this. So go try it out for yourselves.
All right. And then lastly, if we didn't address any of the questions or concerns that you might have with a test like this, please let us know. Hit us up on social media, or you can find all the information. We're gonna put it in the show notes. But I want to encourage you to reach out, because it could be the difference between being healthy and having control over your health for the rest of your life and not. And also something as simple as like, oh, I didn't realize that all you have to do is take a Q-tip and run it on the toilet paper, put it in the vial and send it back off. It's that simple, right? And so if what I'm saying is just enough to get you over the fence to actually try it, I would say kudos to me, kudos to us, because we've helped someone to understand more about what's happening in their body. So I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I'm going to continue geeking out on this, and maybe we do another follow-up once I do my retest.
And we'll see if we can get your accuracy up.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Josh.
It's been very helpful.
So fun.
Simply walk the talk. Walk the talk, talking facts. Move like me, but I move a little fast. Make my move, here to last. Fasten these seatbelts, I'm coming past. Take care of me, longevity. Hack my biology, better believe. Walking the talk, soul, mind, and body connected. Better come give us a listen.